Oh, no, I'm moving. I was just making sure that it was getting what it needed to. Yeah.
Okay, everyone. I want to welcome you to this extra talk. We want to welcome Professor Meier from Political Science Department. Professor Moyer is the Charles Gregory Chair in Liberal Arts at our school, at Texas A&M actually. He is a graduate of Syracuse University, the Maxfield School. Nice. He is a very prominent scholar in the field of public management, public administration. His CV is quite long and impressive. He was awarded George Fredrickson's Award by the Public Management Research Association, and he was also awarded the Dwight Waldo Award from the American Society of Public Administration. Some of you have read or will read some of the work by Professor Moyer, and today he's going to talk to us about context and public management. So please join me in welcoming Professor Moyer.
Thank you for that very nice introduction. And let me preface this by saying, let's go to economics rules. You can interrupt me at any point. In fact, it wouldn't hurt if you interrupt me because, I'm not sure how much material I have, and so if you talk some, then I won't. Because this is sort of a mixed audience, I thought I might start out by giving some background on how this paper came to be and why I think this is an important area of research in public administration. Just on Monday, I was at the American Society for Public Administration annual meeting, something I don't regularly go to, but did because I was asked to do a retrospective on Herbert Simon's piece, Proverbs of Administration, and asked the question, have we made any progress? And I thought it might be interesting to frame my motivation for the whole study within Simon's criticism. Simon said only two things about public administration in that essay. One, our theories make no sense whatsoever. They're incoherent, they contradict each other, we can't use them for anything. And secondly, we have no empirical findings at all. Well, other than that, the field is pretty healthy. Well, indeed, the field of public management 15 years ago had lots of theories, but almost no empirical evidence. And in fact, most of it was case studies, most of it was prescriptive, a lot of it was borrowed from the private sector. And it's that agenda in which this project fits. The public management performance agenda was, in fact, very much an academic agenda. The idea was we were going to bring social science skills to public management. We were going to bring precise mathematical theories, large N data sets. In this agenda, it's okay to be wrong, and something I'm going to tell you today is wrong. But it's not okay to be ambiguous. You need to be precise about what you're saying, because there's no way we as scholars will ever be able to give advice to practitioners unless we're precise about what we're saying and we're accurate in what we find, and that requires a scientific base to do so. This agenda had a lot of its origins right here at Texas A&M and in the Bush School. The 5th National Public Management Conference, which is where a lot of this started, was held in the Bush School. There were a series of 3 conferences held in Tucson, Syracuse, and College Station, where a group of people got together and defined this agenda. It's essentially a who's who in public management. Carolyn Heinrich, Pat Ingram, Larry Lynn, Al Rainey, Rick Millward, Larry O'Toole, Sergio Fernandez, Don Manahan, and a bunch of others. Part of this agenda, and a lot of it happened here. The focus of what I'm going to do today, and the focus of my agenda, has always been on scholarship, not practice. For the MPAs in the group, and I see there are a lot of you, we occasionally translate this into language that normal people care to read. And this is a piece in the American Review of Public Administration that actually talks about what we call our evidence-based public translates it into what we think are practical advice, and in part this indicates that a lot of what was put out in the new public management is probably both wrong and probably both harmful in the process. So public management performance, what we've picked up in the last 15 years are lots of evidence that management and public organizations matters for performance. It matters for effectiveness, it matters for efficiency, it matters for a variety of things. The problem with these studies is much of the evidence is being drawn from very few data sets. Those findings from those different data sets also vary, and I'm going to show you a really stark example of that in the process. And so we have lots of findings. They're sometimes contradictory, sometimes conflicting. And it's that problem I want to address today. How to bring some order out of this chaos and how to demonstrate that context works. Let me just sum up the research literature. We went through the Journal of Public Administration Research and Theory, which, well, as an editor-in-chief, as a plug, it's the journal you should always go to first. In the first 23 volumes, there were 66 studies that linked empirically management to performance. All but 15 used data from the United States. Probably 25 of those used data from Texas school districts. Okay? Now, I do believe you can answer every question in public administration with data from Texas school districts. But you should not let me convince you of that, because I don't know the reason generosity. Of the other 15, 7 of those are using English local government data out of the research shop of George Boyne, which leaves us 8 studies of all other countries. No study in any country more than once. 3 studies outside of North America or Europe. Now, they do have various levels of government and various different policy fields, but our base knowledge is very, very narrow. And quite frankly, what works in the United States or what works in Texas schools might not work elsewhere. And let me illustrate that. This is a study that's going to come out in the international. Yeah.
Sorry, are you equating public management with public administration at this point?
I actually don't see a distinction between public management and performance. You know,
administration. Sorry, administration.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Between public management and public administration, I don't see a distinction.
Okay.
I've always thought I was in public administration until somebody told me I was in public management.
Okay.
And I had to be convinced of that. I'm the only person. The public management conference used to be by invitation only. I'm the only person who ever turned down an invitation because I said I wasn't in public management. I tried that a second time, and I was told that was not an option. This is a study, International Journal of IPMJ, International Public Management Journal. It looks at the management of Texas and Denmark schools and looks at a set of pretty parallel measures. The impact of both of these is to look at the impact on test score performance. The first variable is the quality of personnel in terms of human resources development. And you notice that it's got a massive impact to Texas. In Denmark, not so much. Prospecting, the idea that you should be an innovative, risk-taking, chance-taking manager, looking for new opportunities. That's important in Texas. It's not in Denmark. The experience of a manager matters a little bit both places, but a lot more in Texas. Personnel turnover, statistically significant in Texas, does not matter at all in Denmark. Networking with the political branches upward of the micromanagement process, a big factor in Texas, nothing in Denmark. Networking out to the community, a big factor in Texas, nothing in Denmark. Parallel models, almost everything's working in Texas, nothing's working in Denmark. Now, this is really bad because sometimes in Denmark they ask me to tell them how to manage schools. And I can tell them lots of things that work in Texas, but I'm putting it into a context that doesn't work for that. And it doesn't work for very specific reasons, many of which we'll talk about in this talk. In part, one of the real differences here is the scope of authority that a principal has in Texas versus Denmark. In Denmark, a principal is not even allowed to assign teachers to classes. Teachers assign themselves to classes. In Texas, you're allowed to hire your own teachers, not in a unionized system like Denmark. And in fact, the principal there is thought of as first among equals, not as a manager. And so the amount of authority they have is very circumscribed. Now that's probably going to change because even though this is a corporatist political system that relies on consensus, the national government locked out teachers this last year and changed all the labor rules and are going to see if they can force Denmark principals to actually manage Danish schools. It's an interesting concept that I want to see play out. Okay, let's go that way. All right, considering context. What I want to do is sketch out a set of contexts that I think relate to management, public management, in a variety of ways, and specify a series of hypotheses on all of those sort of things. And I'm going to do this with one exception. I'm not going to talk about the difference between public, private, and nonprofit impacts. We have done that in a separate theoretical paper that appeared in J. Park, where we talk about various things that we think will work more or less effectively in public, private, and nonprofit organizations. And I would recommend that because I think it's the one paper that actually asks the right question. And I don't think the right question is, are public, private, and nonprofit organizations different? I think the important question is, if you manage them the same, do you get the same results? And that's what that agenda is focused on. That is, if you use the same techniques in the public sector as the private sector, do you get the same type of results? And there is, in fact, very little data on that question. The logic of context. We're going to begin with a very simple model where some outcome of an organization is a function of management, it's a function of context, and it's a function of a set of exogenous factors. Now, that's not what we're going to actually do here. We're actually going to use it as an interactive effect. What is, we think the case is what happens is that management and its impact depends on the context it's operationalized. And that context determines whether it's positive, negative, or simply not in existence. We rearrange the terms, and we're going to focus on that term beta 1 plus beta 4 plus C. This, by the way, is all the math you're going to see in this presentation. So those of you in the MBA class can just take a sigh of relief because you've already seen every piece of data and every piece of math I'm going to show. Okay? Which is an all-time record. I'm only like 13 minutes in, and I'm already through with that stuff. Okay. The point about the whole process here is that context can either strengthen or weaken a relationship between management and performance. In certain contexts, some management is going to work. In other contexts, it won't work. It might even flip the signs and generate a negative result. For example, if you look at the amount of education a manager has in a Latin America city, it's positively correlated with performance. Education matters. If you look at the amount of education a head of a UK bureaucracy has in the United Kingdom, education is negatively related to performance. Now, let me let you in the secret of that. There's a selection bias problem there because the people only with bachelor's degrees in the UK that actually head agencies all graduated from either Oxford or Cambridge. Right? But, in fact, you also get that same negative relationship among school principals in Denmark. The more education they have, the worse their schools perform while controlling for all sorts of other factors. And we don't think there's a selection bias there. That is, there's an incentive to get more education, and there's not much of a performance system to hold it together. We're going to do this within the context of existing theories of public management and consider how those factors change. I want to consider three aspects of context. The political context, and know, since I'm in the political science department, I have to tell you that that has to be important, or somebody's going to question what I do for a living. Actually, they do that all the time. Secondly, the environmental context of the organization, and third, the internal context. And I'm going to theorize about the overall impact of management and also its marginal effect, and I'm going to come back to that. Now, here's the Cliff Notes version, right, for all of you who want to get everything out of this lecture right now and can sleep through the rest of it, is that context either makes management situations more or less complicated, whether it's any of these sort of things. And in a more complicated system, a public manager is going to have to exert more effort to generate the same positive results. That is, it's going to be harder to get results as situations become more complicated, as they become more complicated politically, environmentally, or contextually internally. The implication of that is that as you get into more complex situations, a given unit of management will be less productive overall. That is, its marginal payoff is going to decline. The other implication of that, however, is, though, that probably in those complicated environments means that management is likely to account for more of the variance in program performance. And that good versus bad management will just simply have a larger range because public managers are engaging in a larger range of activities because they have to. They don't have the advantage of being in a very simple situation where what you want to do is easy to figure out. So, the first application, political context. This paper focuses on the concentration of political power. Political systems can either concentrate it or disperse it. In the United States, we disperse it. We create a separation of powers system, and then just to help that along, we create federalism to disperse it even further. The best thing to summarize this is there's some work in the comparative political economy literature about the clarity of responsibility. Political systems vary in how clear it is who's responsible for what. And so you know if you're in the United Kingdom that the Prime Minister is responsible. That's the one person you can blame. In the United States, you really don't know who's responsible. Everybody's going to blame each other, of course. And at the same time, you're going to have multiple and conflicting jurisdictions, none of which are going to give any clear guidance to the bureaucracy. This sometimes gets exacerbated by processes that concentrate or diffuse power, right? By whether or not you have a corporatist political process where all vested interests are invited in and they're supposed to work out their disputes, come to a consensus agreement, and then broaden and implement. Corporatist political systems say if you don't participate, you don't get considered. If you do participate, you have to buy into the solution. That's very different from the American adversarial process where you don't have to participate, and even if you don't participate, you still probably can complain about it. And of course, even if you do participate and lose, you can then go to court and sue people. Right? And so it's essentially an adversarial process versus a consensual process. The degree to which you disperse power, and this is pure Norton law from sort of classic public administration, the degree to which you disperse power and make it adversarial, you complicate the public manager's task. It is far more difficult to manage public programs in the United States than it is in a corporatist political system, where you have political consensus about what you're supposed to be doing and the resources you have. If you get a job like that after you finish your degree, consider yourself lucky if you know exactly what you're supposed to do and what resources you have control of. We don't like to do that. In a situation like that, what it requires is that managers need to be politicians. They need to do what Larry and I call networking in the environment. As Norton Long said, if the political system doesn't give you power, you have to build your own. You have to cultivate interest groups, you You have to cultivate the other providers of services. You have to create networks. You have to interact with politicians. And you have to sort of build the consensus and the support you need to actually generate the program. So we're going to see more of that type of networking and in a system that indeed concentrates political power. Which means, hypothesis two, I think, that management is actually going to have a greater impact in those political contexts that disperse power because it becomes an actual variable. It is indeed the case that if you have massive consensus over what an education system should do, such as Finland, it's not really hard to manage a Finnish school. You've got a very homogeneous population that's changing a little bit, but you've got a real consensus on the fact that, well, we're not going to even start that school until the kids are in the 7th grade, or 7 years old, and we're not going to test them a whole lot, and we're going to focus on a certain set of skills, and we're still going to kick the crap out of the international comparison tests. And so you've got a really nice thing, and it's not hard to manage that, because you've got the consensus, you've got the resources, etc. The dispersal of political power, and this shouldn't be surprising to any of you, reduces the likelihood of program success. And it makes that marginal impact, that is, there's going to be more management, but the marginal impact of management is going to end up being low. And that fits the basic set of hypotheses. There's a throwaway hypothesis here, which I'm not going to much talk about, but if you bring in a performance appraisal system, as you're all familiar with performance appraisal systems, they're breaking them in everywhere. It's going to be a back and flight. Even at universities, which means mostly we fill out a lot of paper multiple times, and it goes up somewhere, and then they ask us to fill out more paper. Someday there'll be resources attached to that big process. I also still believe in a tooth fairy, so. Performance appraisal systems that concentrate political power probably will positively affect the managerial contribution to performance and increase its impact. That's really not part of the basic logic of the paper, but what the heck, it was a throwaway and we thought we'd add it. Second, environmental context. We're going to look at the classic aspects of environmental context, and that is complexity, turbulence, and munificence. We're also going to throw a few things in about social capital and level of development, but they're not really central to the process. Complexity. We know that complexity matters. It used to be great sport when I taught at the La Follette School because people would go out and take city manager jobs, and the plush job you wanted was to get to be assistant city manager of Maple Bluff, Wisconsin. Maple Bluff, Wisconsin was a very tony suburb along Lake Mendota, north of Madison. Okay, it probably had a per capita income at the time of $150,000. You know, really, it sort of made, you know, it's sort of a Wisconsin version of River Oaks, but not as gaudy. A lot of tax revenue, no crime, no big problems. You know, it's the sort of nifty little management job that you can really be happy with and, you know, have a long career and probably never have to get to the office before noon. Right? Or you might be hired as an assistant city manager in Detroit. Okay, not as exciting. I mean, it's going to be a lot more exciting, but indeed it's going to make your job dramatically very difficult process. We see that in schools all the time. It's very easy to manage a school that is very homogeneous and middle class. Anybody can do it. It's very difficult to manage a school that's heterogeneous, mixed in terms of socioeconomic status and race. And if you toss in immigration, it becomes even more difficult. So, our hypothesis is the same as our note-based hypothesis. First of all, we're going to see much more network activity as you get additional complexity. And that's almost a demand, that when you have complexity, you have to be out in the environment and you have to be managing it. You have to deal with complexity, keep it away from the organization. In these more heterogeneous and dispersed environments, which of course reduce the likelihood you'll have successful programs, the marginal impact, again, of managerial activity is likely to be lower. There's going to be more of it, but the marginal impact is going to be lower. In addition, in these more complex environments, you should see it attain more of the variance. Wow, where'd that come from? We also have some hypotheses about path dependence. I guess I won't talk about those. And a hypothesis about management capacity, in part because we get so spoiled in the United States to the idea that almost every place and every organization that we interact with has the capacity to deal with some problems. And I'm very much interested in moving this outside the United States, where in fact the delivery of clean water can be a problem, or you don't have the capacity to deliver even rudimentary health care. And I think those are important types of issues. We've spent a lot of time working on the concept of capacity and how it affects management in the U.S. and in other places. And so, kind of one of our hypotheses for all time sake. Environmental context 3, turbulence in the environment. How fast the environment is changing is going to have the same impact as how complex it is. Turbulent environments, where your clientele, your budgets, your laws, your policies change rapidly, are going to place a premium on managing outward, dealing with the environment, smoothing out those fluctuations. It's going to create a reduced likelihood of program success and a lower marginal impact of any management, even though management does still explain more of the variance. Munificence. Skip 12 and go to 13. As we were just talking about Maple Bluff, there are in fact some places that you have a lot of resources. I know that's been drilled into your heads that all public programs are starving and that you will all be operating on a shoestring. Well, most of you will. A few of you will sometimes lightning will strike and you will have an agency where there's a large flow of money. And one of the things we don't understand very well in public management is what happens when organizations do have a lot of extra resources. We spend a lot of time focused on what happens when our budgets get cut, with very little time focused on what happens when we have additional resources. Though our preliminary data suggests that managers are very rational and smooth chunks of resources into the future in a gradual process so that they don't become dependent on the process. In an environment that's more positive, that will offer, I think, opportunities for enhancing organizational interests and performance. And so I think managers will increase not just their effort to manage the environment, but to exploit it. When you go out in the environment, you have two options. Are you looking for opportunities to exploit an environment, or are you looking to keep harmful things away from your organization and buffer them? Now, a clever manager can see the same thing and go either way. The best illustration of that actually happened right here at Texas A&M when Robert Gates was president of this university. The legislature gave us a 5% budget cut. And Robert Gates says, oh, wow, 5%. Which 5% from the state means it's a 1% overall budget cut. We can either pass this down to everybody and cut their budgets by 5% of state cuts, like every other university president will do. Or he said, I think this actually means we should just make some decisions. And so here's what we're going to do. He announces this in April. I'm going to move 400 faculty positions from underperforming units to performing units, overperforming units. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to raise $1 billion to hire the other 400 faculty to also give them to the high-performing units. Faculty committee has been appointed. You have until September to come up with a plan, or I am launching this without you. Okay? He could have buffered. And he said, no, I'm going to exploit it. And in fact, Gates delivered on all of those except for $1 million. He actually raised $1.4 billion to do it. And as a result, there are some of us who dearly miss Robert Gates. But that's a case of how management perception can turn what is essentially a detrimental aspect into a series of things that really did strengthen the organization. Environmental context. Yeah, we've done those. Environmental context 6, if you have in fact a environment that is less beneficial, we think in fact most of the opportunities will be out there trying to reduce the detrimental impacts. That is trying to buffer the organization from harmful effects, either structurally or management. We need to deal with internal operations that somehow stabilize performance, or in fact make the organization more efficient. We've spent a lot of time studying Texas schools on what happens when they get major budget cuts or they get hit by something like a hurricane. You learn, Herbert Simon said, you don't learn about anything about an organization until you break it. Right? That's where you learn the most. So we like to study organizations that get severely stressed. It is very impressive about how a variety of organizations, school districts, can take as high as a 10 to 15% budget cut and have it not have any impact on their performance. At least once. Right. It's really hard to take a 15% budget cut twice and not have some problem. By reallocating, protecting your core performance, instruction, giving up your expenditures on a variety of other things, at least temporarily, and making marginal adjustments here and there. It's very similar to the stuff that would happen during hurricanes, where people would actually look at a certain problem they were faced and find an analogy to the problem and say, that's how I can solve that problem. And so when the Houston Independent School District gets 6,000 students as a result of the Hurricane Katrina evacuation, their initial response is, oh, well, this actually does happen more often than we think, because we start the school year with 176,000 students. It peaks at 210,000 students in November because of all the migrant workers. So why not use the migrant worker program to assess kids from Louisiana and use that for classification purposes? Right? Buffering a negative impact in the environment. Marginal return. I want to talk a little bit about hypothesis 19, which comes out of nowhere. The level of social capital in the community interacts with management to enhance the impact of management performance. You would think that if you were in a community with a great deal of social capital and you had some management talent, that would be the best of both possible worlds. As I remember, I told you I wanted to be precise. That's a precise hypothesis. All evidence indicates that's wrong. Okay, and it's wrong on, in a couple of cases we've already found, one in the UK and one in Texas. It appears as though management and social capital are substitutes for each other. That in places where you have high social capital, it's easy to manage and nobody sweats it much. In places with low social capital, there's a premium on management and you have to bring it into the situation. The Texas case is an interesting case because we're looking at school districts in Texas, and one of the things we find is social capital has distributional effects. High social capital communities get much better test scores for their white students, some for their Latino students, and nothing for their African American students. The management measures that we use show that management affects white students, it affects Latino students more, and it affects black students even more. The two, when they interact, substitute for each other, which means that at the equivalent of 2 standard deviations below the mean on social capital, the equivalent level of management 2 standard deviations above the mean can wipe out that negative social capital. Now that's an interesting finding. Unfortunately, it wasn't one we predicted, so this will go in print and we'll be embarrassed by that. But then the advantage is this: they will cite an article by me, contradiction, an article by me. And so that means I get 2 citations. Wrong. If I were right, how many would I get? None. There you go. All right. Quality. Let's go to internal organization context. I want to make plenty of time for questions. So let me just talk about three things in internal context. One is the degree of goal conflict and ambiguity. It's a fact of life for those of you who are MPA students. You're going to go out and you're going to discover that all those beautiful, rational decision models that people have tried to convince you are out there, where somebody gives you a set of goals, and then you look at all the alternatives you have and evaluate them, et cetera, and pick the optimal one. It just doesn't even start in the right way. First of all, nobody's going to give you a set of goals. Or if they are going to give you a set of goals, they're not going to give you a set of consistent goals. They're going to Or they're going to make you find out what your goals are anyhow, because all we do is operational stuff here, and you figure out what our purpose is for doing all this stuff. Public organizations have lots of goal conflict and lots of goal ambiguity, particularly in a system like the United States, which has a lot of political dispersion. Because in many cases, our legislatures cannot agree on goals to adopt a policy. The professional responsibility and welfare reform, or whatever the TANF reform, is a classic example of that, as you have people from two sides of the political spectrum adopting a reform policy with radically different goals. And then it's handed to a bureaucracy that's encouraged to implement this with enthusiasm. Right? And so this goal conflict, goal ambiguity, indeed puts a premium on management to be able to deal with that. And we almost know nothing about how organizations deal with goal conflict. The best logic says, well, when you have goal conflict, you should deal with the goals simultaneously, or I mean, sequentially. But in what order? Which conflicts? We think as ambiguity and conflict increase, the marginal contribution of a given level of management is going to decline. Second aspect of internal management is where discretion is vested. We're generating lots of literature now that suggests that it's management in certain parts of the organization don't matter at all. It's management when they're actually making decisions that matters. And when it matters in all types of organizations, we know that it varies between organizations. If in fact one was looking at the impact of education on school children, we know that the impact of teachers is massive, the impact of principals is less so, and the impact of superintendents is less than that. As you go up, you lose some of the leverage. You get greater reach, but you lose some of the leverage. And indeed, we know that, for example, in child support collections, that the real management is at the supervisory level, not at the street level, and that's where these sort of performance things are really tested. We also think that it changes the nature of management. As you decentralize, you go less from hierarchical direction to more goal setting and motivating personnel. Oops. Finally, professionalization. The paper argues that as public organizations become more professionalized, the impact of management on performance will increase, but the marginal influence of management again will decline. Professionals are more difficult to manage than non-professionals because they bring their own values. So, all these hypotheses, what are we doing with this? Other than killing trees. Always a fair question to ask. Right? Is there an objective here other than death to trees? And there is an objective other than death to trees. This is to be a research issue. We would love it if people could actually test the whole thing, and we know that's impossible. Nobody can test 26 hypotheses. Any clown who would put out 26 hypotheses in a single paper is foolish. And nobody's going to get a study with enough variation to be able to test it. So we have a much more modest strategy. We're going to encourage researchers to place their empirical studies of management performance into a contextual matrix that is based on this theory, where we'll ask people to actually categorize where they fit in terms of concentration of power, environmental context, internal context, and hope to build up from a set of individual studies, some attempt to be able to generalize. Now, if you want to see if this is actually going to work, or if I'm on drugs, we're going to try this May 15th, right here at College Station. As part of my advanced public management class, we always have a mini seminar at the end and bring a bunch of people from outside. And so we will be doing, from the outside, a series of people looking at this in different contexts. And just to give you sort of a hint of what may be coming, Sergio Fernandez will be here, and he will be doing some work on representative bureaucracy in South Africa, and looking at the impact of representative bureaucracy on performance, getting some, I think, some stunning results. Reese Andrews will be here from Cardiff University, and he'll be looking at English local government, social capital, and management performance. Renee Torgenfleet will be here from the Netherlands, and he will be working on networking behavior in Netherlands local government. Ricardo Gomez will be doing some stuff on Brazilian local government and the ability of Brazilian local government managers to increase performance. Claudia Averieda will be here doing something on one of her many Latin America studies, probably her Honduran or El Salvadorian studies. If you've read her work, she has the amazing ability to get city mayors, who are the key managers in Latin America, to actually participate in experiments and actually tell her what they would do under certain circumstances, including who they would bribe and whether or not they would actually deliver any services. We will also have Young-Hong Chung from Korea applying this to public, private, and nonprofit managers. We'll have Anne Kajelsen from Denmark applying this to some work in Denmark. And we'll also have some U.S. work on nursing homes and universities. All different contexts, all looking at how management affects performance, hoping this works. On the other hand, this article's already been accepted, so I'm home free. And so they would simply have to say, well, we had this theory didn't work very well, but that's just tough luck, going on. So that's what I'm doing now. Questions, comments?
So we have around 15 minutes for questions. Who would like to go first?
I'm used to stunned silence.
Public management students, you need to ask questions. Well, public management professor.
So thank you very much. One of the pieces that really interested me is the relationship between social capital and management. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you're defining and then measuring social capital?
Yeah, well, and that's a good question, because we've developed a couple of measures of social capital. The one I was referring to in this study is an assessment of the degree to which individuals in the community join organizations, contribute charitable activities, participate in meetings and sort of political events. We also, by the way, if anybody is interested in this in broader context, have an over time across U.S. states measure of social capital from 1986 through 2009, which we can demonstrate pretty much correlates very strongly with social capital as Robert defines social capital. Whether you accept that definition or not, our measure fits that pretty well. And so it's primarily the joining part. We don't have a measure of trust on that. The UK measures of social capital are also organizational types of membership.
Thank you.
It seems like the Achilles heel of a lot of these studies is going to be the measurement of performance.
I'm sorry?
It seems like the Achilles heel of a lot of these studies you want to pull into your theory is going to be the measurement of performance. Could you talk a little bit about the kinds of pitfalls associated with doing that part wrong?
Yeah, the measurement of performance is indeed an Achilles heel here. There are two solutions, one of which is terrible. One solution that a lot of people use in different organizations is ask the people in the organization how well they perform. I've published multiple times on why that's just stupid. and the fact that By my estimates, 50% of the correlations out of work like that are spurious, which means they're flipping coins. All performance measurement is flawed. Let me start with that. That's why there's this massive field called performance measurement. Even where we have highly developed systems of performance measurement, we recognize they're incomplete. And so on the Texas schools, we try to analyze 6, 7, 8 measures of performance, but most of them are test score based. And we're not catching the other stuff. We're not catching the critical thinking. We're not catching. And I've always been, you know, having taught a lot of students from Texas schools, I'm never sure how much critical thinking there is involved. but people tell me they're supposed to be. But indeed, that's one of the problems. It's really a problem in our Denmark Texas study because we're using test scores from 2 different countries, which have different philosophies of when to test, what to test, and what difference it makes. And they're both high stakes tests, right? Because the Denmark test will kick you to a university or trade school or wherever else they kick people, and the ones in Texas. But they're designed differently. They've got different dispersions, and they affect disadvantaged students differently. And so, indeed, we have yet in the United States been able to really figure out how to compare a test score from Texas with a test score from California, right? Which creates a real difficulty in doing this. I can, at some point, which I'm going to do nationally, opt out by using fixed effects, right? Because I don't have any other solution to this problem. But that's indeed a problem, because in many cases you have performance databases that give you data on stuff that's not what you think you're supposed to be doing, or doesn't really capture all of it. And so it becomes very rough. Sometimes you get some really interesting findings even with sloppy data. Off of our nursing home stuff, we're looking at when managers respond to performance. And we got 2 sets of performance indicators, one dealing with the health effects of the residents and one dealing with the financial returns. Right? And the first part of the study finds exactly what you'd expect. Public organization people spend a lot of time focusing on health effects, but nothing on the finance side. The private people focus on the finance side and never change policy based on the health side. Which is kind of surprising because you think those things run in tandem, but they don't particularly run in tandem. What's interesting then is both of them respond to performance gaps in the same way by changing their managerial strategy. That is, in the public sector, if they have a gap on health things, they start engaging in a variety of innovative search. In the private sector, if they have a gap on income, they start engaging in innovative search. But they don't on the other side. So an income gap on government doesn't trigger this, and a health gap on the private side doesn't trigger that. But again, Lori's really correct. Performance measurement is not all the work done on it. Every piece needs to be qualified and make sure you've got exact measures. So?
Thanks for coming. It's good to see you out in Bushville today. So, you're using the term public management. Are there any inferences you think you'll be able to make from the studies in terms of the difference individuals make as public managers rather than treating that as a whole variable?
Oh yeah, no, I love looking at the cases. Okay, and I know how risky that is because I know the confidence limits are on cases. But indeed, we're actually engaging in some research in Denmark to actually reverse do this and sort managers into types. And we do have 4 clear types with actual some performance differences where clusters of behaviors result in certain types of things. Other clusters of behavior are detrimental. So we'll be able to probably get to types and, you know, with some qualitative evidence can probably get to some of the other stuff. If I might share one of the other fun findings we have, we're launching a set of studies on organization recovery. What happens in a failing organization and how can you turn it around? And one of the big case we're using is U.S. colleges and universities. failure being defined in the lowest quartile. And what we're really interested in is what happens when you hire a new president, and what sort of president do you hire? Because there's a mythology out there that in fact you should go and hire somebody completely different, particularly somebody from the private sector who knows how to do this. Our preliminary models show if you're a failing organization and you hire somebody from the private sector or in the college or university, you're not going to reverse the trend. That is, you're going to still be bad 5 or 6 or 7 years later. In fact, the fun part about this is we look at the decisions made in the first year of the presidency on things like budgets, changing your student allocations, changing how you're allocating your bureaucrats, changing your mission stuff, things that could add up to strategic behavior to fix your problems. The only university presidents who engage in any strategic behavior at all are people hired from the same university who have a high H index. An H index means you published a lot and you're cited a lot. The only strategic thinkers we find are the scholars. Okay. Now, that is going to be interesting when that maybe hits print, because a bunch of academics are going to say, we told you so. And a bunch of people from boards of regents will never talk with us again. But again, you have to understand, I gave you theory today. I'm a pure empiricist, right? It's why I'm quite willing to say, okay, I was wrong on social capital. The data is going to tell me, I think, what works. Gina?
I'm thinking about your example about President Gates. And what he did, what he came up with was really creative and clearly something that a lot of people here thought was a great idea and a lot of people wouldn't have come up with. And a lot of people, when given that 5% cut edict, would have made the 5% cut and said, good job, that was a success. So I'm wondering how you deal with that empirically but also theoretically, thinking about what could be sort of the lack of limitations on what a grand success really is, when the success of the order is